There is this unmistakable advantage to having a hybrid club in the golf bag because it can help you get out of so many situations. My guest today is like that hybrid club with the USGA. Scott Lipsky, he gives them so many different wonderful traits in boosting what they're doing. And we're going to tell his story here on the On to Something podcast. I'm Bryan Fenley. Right now, Scott is Assistant Director of Digital Media at the USGA. He's a dad. He's a lot of things. And we're going to get the full breadth of his story here. Scott, I'm excited to have you on. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Bryan. Really excited to share, what everything that goes into, the things you just mentioned. I mean, dad first, obviously, and then what I do in the golf industry at the USGA specifically. So let's have some fun.
It all got started for you at Indiana University, and you
hmm
were a sports personality, college radio.
hmm
If I were to flip the dial when you were in college and to listen to one of your monologues or to hear one of your hot takes, if you will, what am I going to hear from you back then?
Oh boy, it was interesting because we were on the Blue WIUX in Bloomington, Indiana. And really, I think the ideal scenario would be to go heavy on college sports, and obviously Indiana basketball we talked about a ton. That was during the Mike Davis years, and I was there. With Bracy Wright at the beginning, Eric Gordon at the end, and so we saw some highs and lows and some unbelievable moments there, though we never quite got to where we wanted to. But it's interesting. So many of my colleagues, fellow classmates who were on the radio, we all wanted to obviously work national. I mean, we were from all over the country. Indiana has students from all over the place, so we talked about a lot of professional sports. And so this is going back to 2005, 2006, and so you had I'm a huge Mets fan. The Mets made their NLCS appearance back then. We had the Colts Bears Super Bowl, which in Bloomington was a huge deal. So we talked a lot of professional sports. Bloomington, with Indiana football being what it was, college football may have taken a back seat a little bit, but no, I mean, we kind of ran the gamut. Everybody wanted to get to that next level, and it was really fun and a really great way to get into the industry initially. The most fun part about that time in my life when it came to broadcasting as a student was actually being able to broadcast the games. And so we went to all over Big Ten country. There were a lot of us, so we would each go to one or two road games a year, and then we would get one or two games at home. And so, the most memorable game that I recall was being at Illinois in 2008. Eric Gordon's, I would say, return to Illinois, but he had committed to Illinois, for those who are of a certain age, and it was a big deal. He backed out and went to Indiana instead, committed under Kelvin Sampson. And his one game at Illinois, I got to do play-by-play with one of my fellow student broadcasters, and so that was awesome. I mean, the energy there, obviously, the students, the Orange Crush and Champaign, they were amped up for the whole thing. And IU actually ended up winning the game. It was an unbelievable road game, and really just an incredible atmosphere. And that's one of the things that I'll remember the most.
What would one of your calls of an Eric Gordon bucket have sounded like during that broadcast?
Oh God. Well, I do remember he hit a huge three. It was, I think, in the second half or overtime, but I think it was in the second half, and it was off the window. So I just remember, Gordon for three off the backboard. It went in. It went in. Eric Gordon off the bank. So that was really, really cool. Yeah, no, it's been a while since I've gotten to do play-by-play. I did, especially for basketball. Right after I was finished with college, I did a summer of Coastal Plains League baseball, wooden bat league, for some of the top college players in the country. So I got to do baseball for a while there. And then when I was at Kennesaw State, working full time, I got to do some play-by-play at times, some basketball again. And so, we're going back a decade plus, but it was fun. It was fun trying to develop that unique sound and trying to borrow from some of the people you grew up watching. I mean, I remember one time I said put it in the books when I was doing a High Toms game in Thomasville, North Carolina. And I said after that, you know what, I shouldn't do that again. That's how I rose this thing. I've got to come up with my own call. And never stuck with play-by-play long enough to really develop my own catchphrases or anything like that. But yeah, no, it was really cool developing that and getting to do that at all different levels.
Scott Lipsky is with me, Assistant Director of Digital Media at the USGA. Bryan Fenley with Tennis Channel, also a golf broadcaster. So, Scott, you obviously, as a broadcaster and beyond, were always taking and learning from other people.
Mhm.
But when you think about your own run in this industry, from everything you've done and the steps you've made, of the play-by-play in a sense that you've done in
Mhm.
getting to where you are today, what has inherently distinguished yourself and been wholly you and not somebody else? Or where
Right.
does your own self come out in your journey?
I think what allowed me to, move along in the industry, and you see so many folks in the sports industry, start out, and the hours or the pay or the lack of opportunities, or sometimes you get knocked down a couple of times. I think what just allowed me to keep on going was to just realize that this was something that I wanted to do, and it didn't bother me if I was working an 85-hour week. And that's not to pat myself on the back. It's definitely not for everybody. And I think one of the things that maybe the sports industry has started to get a little bit better at, but still needs to improve upon, is I think we use that as a badge of honor a little bit too much. And if we do now, we certainly did in 2009 and 2010, when I was really trying to ingratiate myself. And I started out at Kennesaw State, and it was one of those things where the one opportunity they had, I had just been an accountant, and I was not enjoying it, and I was looking for anything in the sports industry that could get me started. And Kennesaw State needed a graduate assistant, and the pay was very little. I mean, obviously not, starting out as an accountant, you get a full-time salary, and it's a tough jump to make. But just not worrying about what level it was at that point. Kennesaw didn't have football yet. They just moved into Division 1. People had barely heard of the school. It's a mid-major now. It was barely low major there. And so what sort of made me uniquely me, I was covering cross country, I was covering track and field, and I ended up doing softball as well that first year. And to me, Kennesaw State track and field was Alabama football. I treated it as such. We had an indoor track meet in the winter, and I did game notes. I had no idea. I didn't intern in the sports information department. In college, I was not I was an accounting, master's degree in accounting, business major. So, there were a lot of things that I didn't know. And, it took doing something like that and people saying, like, nobody does game notes for track and for an indoor track meeting unless it's like the conference championship, right? So treating everything as if like this is the most important thing that I could possibly be doing. It doesn't matter whether it's a revenue sport, non-revenue sport, whatever conference you're in, division, it didn't matter. I was going to treat that as if it was a huge deal. And I think that's, I've never heard this explicitly, but I think that's what allowed me to, be there for opportunities as they came up. Doing that and just not being afraid to do a little bit of everything. I mentioned, I did some play-by-play when I was at Kennesaw when there was a need for that. When somebody needed to do shot clock or do stats during the game, I was willing to do that and just be put in situations that you don't necessarily feel like you're 100% ready for, but you have to learn it and you have to jump into the deep end sometimes. And I think that's what helped me significantly, I think.
Which goes back to the intro of you being like hybrid club, because
Yeah.
you're able to be used in so many different ways out on the golf course, but here, obviously, in what you can do from an industry standpoint. And there's really nothing you can't do. Scott Lipsky is with me with the USGA. That grit and that heart and that desire and that wanting to make it no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you trace that mentality? Obviously, we see it unfold with the steps you've taken to where you are. Can't wait to get into our discussion about what you do with the USGA.
Yeah.
But just the mentality that you're talking about, it's not necessarily learned. It could be just the way in which you're wired. Where did that all come from?
I think it's just having a passion for what you're doing. I mentioned briefly that I was an accountant before I went into sports information. Sort of, finished up school, did the summer of broadcasting, already had that accounting job lined up. I went from working 70, 80-hour weeks with the Thomasville High Toms that summer. You go into accounting, I mean, you're talking about a 40 to 50-hour week until busy season. It gets a little bit busier then, but I didn't feel that burn and that desire to work 78 or 80 hours a week. I think once you find your your niche, I really think that there's nothing you can't do if you feel like you're doing something that you want to do when you wake up in the morning. I don't think that there would be that desire for me to work 90 hours a week if I were in auditing or in tax
Yeah.
or in something in that realm. And you know what? I think for a lot of people that's okay. I mean, if you're able to do something that you're okay with and you're good with, and it's 40 hours a week, and that's, that doesn't have to be the biggest part of your life, your career, then that's totally great. Somebody told me at some point, sports information in particular, at co-working in college athletics in particular, is not a job, it's a lifestyle. And so I think it's a matter of embracing that lifestyle. And I did that. At that point in my life, I was able to. I know I love that we're going to talk a little bit about family. I don't know if at 37, where I am now, working in sports information would be the route that I would want to take, and do not just the weeks, but just the odd times. Once you get to when I was the softball SID for 3 seasons, every single weekend there was a game from February through the end of April, and for a lot of people that's great, and people do that for their whole career, and and you find a way to do it. I don't know if that would have been my route that I would have wanted to take. So it's really just about being in the right part of your life and doing something that you love. And if you're okay with making what you do for a living a big focal point of your life, then I think the sky is the limit, and I think that certainly speaks volumes in the sports industry.
Yeah, when you talk about those unheralded heroes in the sports industry, it definitely is those who work in sports information. They work
Oh yeah.
so many hours after games, before games, weekends,
Mm-hmm.
filling, notes together and putting together the game notes. It's just the amount of time that it takes,
Yeah.
obviously, is not conducive to necessarily having a family, but which gives them even more desire to want to be recognized. We have to appreciate
Yeah.
what they did, what you did in that sector, and now that what you're doing with golf. You said earlier, Scott, that everything that you want to attack like it's a big game
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to your work. So then when came that shift for you where you could still see that,
Mm-hmm.
but then also when you wanted to be a dad, that became the big game as
Yeah.
well, where you're able to have that separation and break away from just the solo work focus, which can be really hard to get
It
away
is.
from sometimes.
Yeah, and it's still hard to do. I won't say that I'm 100% when it comes to being able to just completely unplug. I'd say I'm better now than I was 4 or 5 years ago. Especially once we start having kids and all of that. But I was lucky enough. I found the role at the USGA. They were looking for a social media person in 2012. It was the first time they would have a full-time social media role, and so I was lucky enough to fill that role in 2012. And, obviously once you're working the US Open and you're working championship weeks, all bets are off, during those several weeks of the year. But, the environment is very much work-life balance at a place like the USGA. If you're not on site at the US Open, or if it's not one of those huge weeks, one of our 15 championships, and you're not either on site or supporting remotely, then it very much is, a premium on quality of life and work-life balance. And so, I was lucky, before I even got married, I moved into that role. And so, you talk about the unheralded heroes being SIDs. I mean, it's totally true. I work game days at Florida Atlantic. I still do, shot clock and scorebook and all of that. And I'm fortunate enough where I get there 45 minutes before the game, have a slice of pizza, do the game, and then as soon as the game is over, we leave. And I feel fortunate that I have the understanding that, the folks that say, "Hey, how you doing?" when you walk in, they've been there for 4 hours already. They're going to be there for another three. And they probably have a softball game the next day or a baseball game the next morning. The game ops people as well. I mean, they're setting up and breaking down for hours. So, moving into the role at the USGA in 2012, you just kind of respond to the people around you, and everybody understood that when it was time to go to work, USGA is best in class, and the US Open, our best in class championship. But there's a lot of premium on the work-life balance. So I was lucky enough to be to become a part of that early enough in my career where I wasn't totally entrenched into that. Hey, it has to be an 80-hour week every week, and you can never unplug.
How does your son have that talent in being an artist? that you don't have. I've seen pictures of this and what he's
I
done.
don't know.
How did he
Yeah.
get something that you didn't? Clearly.
Well, it's funny, I mean, it's easy to see that he has that talent. And you may not have seen it, but I most certainly don't. I mean, I could barely even what he's doing now. He's 6.5 years old. I'm not capable of doing. I can't sit next to him and draw what he's drawing. Um, I mean, my dad was a good artist, so I guess part of it is hereditary, and it just skipped over me. But it's really amazing to see what he's been doing at such a young age, and loves to draw. I mean, during the World Cup, he's been asking about all the country flags and wanting to draw the different flags, which is really, really cool. And so the interest there very wide. Loves drawing things that are sports related, animals. So yeah, that's really cool. But yeah, I can't take any credit for that. Maybe my side of the family can. I certainly cannot. And I didn't teach him anything, that's for sure.
How does he remind you of your own childhood?
It's funny. He's it's a little bit, it's obviously different, being a generation later, and he is so he grew up or is growing up in a world where YouTube is here. If they want to watch a show, like he's really into Dude Perfect, and he can say, I want to watch Dude Perfect, I want to watch this particular episode, and you can just go ahead and watch it. And for us, it was either on TV or it wasn't. Maybe you had a VHS somewhere, but I think just being really, really interested in getting into sports. I mean, he's doing little league, he's doing soccer. He loves doing that, and asking a lot of questions and making comments that people will go, wait a second, a 6-year-old said that, and just being very, very curious about the world. And so I see a lot of myself in him, but I think he's a little more athletic. He's definitely a better artist. So it's interesting seeing all the similarities with you and your children, but also realizing the environment they're growing up in is just totally, totally different. And they control a lot more of what they see. And when we were growing up, if it wasn't on TV and or if it wasn't in the newspaper, you really couldn't do anything with it. Now that my son is 6 years old, he knows how to type. He can either voice commands into a TV, or he can type on an iPad, and he can basically see what he wants. And we have to be a lot more conscious of that. So it is interesting. There are a lot of similarities, but the environment today is just so much different than how we grew up.
The environment in being with
Yeah,
USGA and the way in which, as your son is, he loves sports. He's so invested in that.
yeah,
How does he cheer you on to this day in what you're doing with USGA? And how does he let you
yeah.
know that he's a fan of yours?
It's really funny. So during the pandemic, so one of our big projects during because long form content was going to be king during the pandemic, but also it was something we were sort of leaning into already and sort of on the upswing. We were editing, just a ton of new long form series, and it was at home, obviously, in 2020. So it was, U.S. Open Classic finishes. We had a History Maker series. We had a Road to Stardom series, and all of those episodes had a studio top with two of my colleagues, Mike Trossel and Dave Jankola. And Mike, you've probably seen in a lot of different places. Dave is on camera a lot, and they've done over 100 intros for those episodes. And I was editing them, so he heard with Mike Trossel, I'm Dave Jankola, probably 500 times during the pandemic. And he recognizes them now, and he's actually repeated it many, many times. It's really, really funny. And a couple of times he'd watch with me a little bit, and watch some of the stuff that I was editing. And so like he's really gotten into the game. And it was really cool to see that he was sort of paying attention to what was going on. That we're at home, but we're still working. And then, separate from that, I started doing replay this year at Florida Atlantic as well, the DV Sport, system. And I had to watch some videos, and he watched them with me. And then, he would ask me, like, he would do a play at home. He would just be dribbling the ball. He's like, all right, now go to the replay monitor and check that out, and show me what they taught you. So yeah, it's fun to see. And it's also one of those things where, given I mostly work myself, I'm at home a lot, how do kids respond to remote work and see their parents working from home? Whereas I never saw, other than a couple of times I went in with my dad, he was a pharmacist, I never saw him work. And I don't ever remember, my mom worked in the school system, I don't ever remember her bringing her work home with her. And so it was totally different lives. And I think that's another interesting thing about this generation. They are seeing their parents at work. My wife works from home, and so he sees our office setups, and he kind of knows what's going on in our lives outside of just being a mom and dad, which is really interesting.
You're absolutely right. You hit on something really important that doesn't get discussed enough, is that underrated tactic that we see when parents are at home, and the inspiration that that can give their kids when they're working. They see them out
Yeah.
there, they see them out and about and doing their thing. And then now they can tangibly see, okay, dad or mom does this, and I
Hmm.
want to be like them, or I want to meet that work ethic, or, do what I can to even
Yeah.
surpass them, because the kids, there's just this fascination and curiosity in their minds. You as a storyteller with the USGA, what do you think defines you as a storyteller, and your approach to getting those stories out, specifically when covering events, but also the story of a golfer and a profile piece?
Right. It's really been fun. I'll say, prior to the role that I'm in now, I was a lot more, focused on content, and up until about 4 or 5 years ago, a lot of written content. Obviously we've seen the entire industry shift, writing still a big part of it, but video being so much more of it. And so earlier in my tenure at the USGA, I had really great opportunities to go to some of our, non-televised amateur championships, and televised, the US amateurs, the junior amateurs, and the amateur championships are just so much different, in that, these are folks that are either students or they work full time, and this is the biggest thing they're going to do of the year when it comes to golf for many of them. US amateur and the juniors, you may get, many of them move on to the PGA Tour, move on to the Opens, things like that. Some of the most enjoyable experiences that I've had, is working at, like the US women's mid amateur, the US mid amateur, and, talking to some folks that, work full time, and this is an unbelievable opportunity for them. And so I really enjoyed, the human element to that. And, this was not work for them, but telling their story about, how they grew up in the game. Maybe they tried professional golf and it just wasn't for them. Maybe they never wanted to be a pro. I remember doing one story at the US Amateur years ago about a player who had played in the US Amateur as a college student, as your traditional, top college player who may or may not move on to the pros. Ended up joining the military, serving the military for some years, and was now getting back into the game competitively. And it was awesome to talk to him about that, about how, he had just started to really focus on the game again, maybe 15 years after he had been a college student, and, started out playing in the state amateurs, and how it's really just not easy to, have full-time responsibilities and still play at an elite level. So I really enjoyed, and still enjoy telling a lot of those stories. I remember, the US women's mid amateur some years ago, talking to the champion right after she had won, and basically said, oh, my boyfriend actually has the trophy right now. He's trying to fit it into our car so we can drive home. We both have work tomorrow. It's a 6 hour drive home, and we have work tomorrow after winning a national championship. I mean, it's pretty awesome to see. And so, from a storytelling perspective, it's obviously going to draw the most eyeballs when we're talking about our elite players in the world at the US Open, the US Women's Open, and that's what makes for the best theater. But the stories that really come from a lot of our amateur competitors, and championships that may or may not be televised, I mean, that's really awesome, because you're really seeing, you're really able to showcase, those athletes, and how many incredible athletes and stories there are out there, beyond what you may see on television, for a few hours.
There clearly is this passion that I can see. And what I noticed from you telling the stories of those who might not get the credit,
Mhm.
the publicity they deserve, is that there's this blue collar mentality that you see that's
Mhm.
pervasive at that level,
Oh yeah.
which goes to one of the key traits that I wanted to make sure people know about you, is that you carry that blue collar mentality. And so it's fun to see, and it's no surprise to me to see how the way in which you operate and the way you think, it just seemingly comes out in your work, where you run into people that share the same characteristics as you, and you're able to spotlight that. Really fun fact, Scott, as well, is that I was a caddy at the United States Junior Amateur
Oh, cool.
back in Rancho Santa Fe, California. That might have been, it was either 2000, I think it was 2005.
Okay.
So just
Nice.
kind
Nice.
of a cool little tidbit there. But when you think about the fulfillment, the self-fulfillment in your journey, what you've done, what you want to do, How much of feeling alive comes from your work?
It's talking about, harkening back to the sports information days, that was a lot of it. And really during the championships, that's when you really feel like, hey, this is what we're putting all of our time and our effort and energy into. US Open, we're working probably 100 hours that week. We're generally on site, and you really feel like you've really contributed to an unbelievable world-class event, and your time and your contributions are really making a difference. And that's where you really get that feeling of energy. I've really tried to make sure that work is not where I'm necessarily pulling that full well of energy from, and really trying to diversify a little bit outside of the workspace. But it's when you work in the sports industry and it's something that you want to do, and especially working for me, I grew up playing golf, not well, that's why I work in the game, but this was something in a place that I wanted to be for so long, that kind of sells itself when it comes to giving yourself energy. So it's easy to do. It's easy to feel like, hey, this is what really sort of sustains me professionally. And then at certain times it sustains you outside of just professionally. You feel like you're really making a difference, and you feel like you're making a difference for sports fans, and that you're really enjoying what you're doing, and it's really serving you well in terms of making you feel like you're where you want to be.
When you celebrate those moments in your career where
Mhm.
there was a breakthrough, and when you consider the amount of work that you put in to see those breakthroughs happen,
Mhm.
when they do occur, like they did with the USGA,
Yeah.
when you got notice that you were going to be joining that team, understanding what grit and what fight and what desire that you had to put in to get yourself into that position, how did that make that moment feel that much more special for you?
It was pretty awesome, just, and also it was April when I found out that I had gotten the position. And so the US Open was 2 months away, and so it was something that you could actually reach out and say, hey, in 7 weeks or 8 weeks or whenever it is, I'm going to be at the Olympic Club, which is where it was in 2012. It was pretty remarkable, and just remembering that, hey, you're going to be tweeting for the USGA on the US Open Golf Twitter handle, and on the US Open Facebook pages, and remembering that what that means and what that represents, was pretty awesome. It was hard to believe, when it happened. So yeah, I mean, it was pretty amazing. And then just to see the way that everything has evolved, over the years, seeing where we were, at the start in 2012 when it came to digital media, not just the USGA, but just the industry at large. It's pretty amazing to look back and say, look at how far we've come. When I first started, you couldn't actually host video on Twitter natively. It had to be embedded through YouTube. So just to give you like one data point of just what it was then versus what it is now, and just how proud I am to see our entire organization really embrace some of that, and how we've evolved over the years, is pretty amazing. So it was an awesome feeling to become a part of things, back in 2012. But it's awesome just to see year in, year out how much we're all growing, as an organization, and just embracing all of those digital concepts and new innovations.
There's so many great
Yeah.
different, such a difference in a variety and a diversification of content that you guys have, which I
Mhm.
absolutely love. And it's not just centrally focused. You're getting it from all over. You're getting it from, as you said, the amateur level in those tournaments. And those are where you really get those enriching stories that
Oh yeah.
not everybody gets. And so as we sort of wrap up this conversation, Scott Lipsky is with me. I'm Bryan Fenley, and of course, Scott is Assistant Director of Digital Media at the United States Golf Association. To think about you coming out of college, having a dream, not knowing what it was going to look like, how it was going to unfold, but to know that it was going to happen some way, shape, and that you were
Mhm.
just going to find a way. What would you be telling right now that younger self
Yeah.
who did not know what was in front of him, did not know what it would take, but that you could tell that young Scott Lipsky, hey, it's going to be okay. We got this.
Yeah, and I wouldn't necessarily say, obviously there are, bumps in the road, and my path was a little bit different in that, I didn't major in sport management. That's becoming more and more of not everybody does, but that's becoming more and more of of a prominent thing in the industry. So, there were certain core things, certain skills and certain experiences that I didn't have that some of my colleagues did have. So I would tell my young self, make sure when you're sort of learning and trying to get into the game that there are some fundamental things that you've experienced along the way. Like I mentioned my experience as an SID, my willingness to work a lot of hours and take whatever was thrown at me is what allowed me to move up. And it wasn't necessarily because I was the most knowledgeable by any means. I mean, there were basic core things that I just didn't know and just hadn't experienced before. So, I would definitely tell, someone coming up in the ranks now, don't be afraid to be, an intern at the lowest levels and, doing things that, watching people that are more experienced. Because when you get thrown into the fire, and I had some really great people to look toward, but a lot of times it was, hey, that's not how that works, right? Like, people who'd done it before, or people that were even at my level who had experiences that I hadn't had, were really a lot of the people that I learned from. So, I would say, don't be afraid to take a couple of years to really learn some of the basic core skills of whether it's sports information or public relations or broadcast or something like that. It'll really pay dividends in the end, and it will allow you to sort of lead in a particular field. I would say, we've got this, because if you're willing to put in all the hours that you're putting that you need to put in, there will be a spot for you somewhere. I mean, when it comes to sports, when it comes to the industry that we're in, so much of it is a passion project, and so much of it is having seen it before. And so if you're willing to put in the time and you've seen it before, then you're going to be put in a lot of positions to lead, and to make a difference. And so, kind of a roundabout answer there, but I would say be willing to put in the time and be willing to learn from the people around you who have seen and done these things before. And don't feel like you need to be leading from day one. You can follow and learn, and it'll really be putting you in a position for success going forward.
And in a way, Scott, your life as a whole seemingly has been one passion project. And I can feel that passion emanating from you. And what a beautiful canvas it has shown itself to be, considering what you do now and your journey. Scott Lipsky, I'm Bryan Fenley. We celebrate when the good guys like yourself. There are so many wonderful men and women in this industry that don't get the credit they deserve. They put in the work and they see good things happen. And so having a chance to show what you went through to get to where you are today, understanding how hard it was, has to give you another level of gratitude as well. You've got the passion, the gratitude, the talent, and then everything else has sort of let itself play out. You're also a pretty good dad as well. We got the whole version of Scott here today. I'm Bryan Fenley, a golf broadcaster and a commentator for Tennis Channel. Scott, thanks so much for diving into your life, man. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And like we've talked about a little bit, it's really the family that makes it all. Seeing what, my son and daughter, my daughter is 3 years old, what they want to do, and the fact that they're able to watch me, pursue my goals and my passions. I'm hoping that they are able to do the same. And, I think it's just a great thing that there's really that focus on the full, well-roundedness of those in the sports industry, because it is so easy to just immerse yourself just in that and not realize that there's so much more to it than just punching the clock and working all those hours. But there's really a place for folks in the industry who do want to have, a family and a great career. And so, it's great that you're talking to so many around the industry.